Good morning, everyone. 51 minutes after the hour. Welcome to the Sunrise Show. Craig Froelich in. I want to welcome in a special guest, Congressman Greg Walden from the District 2 for the great state of Oregon. And Congressman, so glad to be in here.
Craig, good to be with you.
You know,
good morning.
Thank you so much. You're busy. We've talked about your tour Monday and Tuesday through Bend and Prineville and visiting with the high school students up there.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Now you're on to Grants Pass. You're going to be at the Surgery Center in Grants Pass at 10:15, the Grants Pass Rotary at 12 o'clock, the Wild River Pub over there, and then back to Medford for Anna Maria tour at 2:15, and then at 3:45 you'll be discussing this Crater Lake Wilderness with the Medford Chamber of Commerce. Touch on that briefly. This extra 500,000 acres over and above the national park at Crater Lake. Why?
You know, and the worst part of it for me, and I realize you probably have some supporters out there, but the worst part is once you declare wilderness, then you walk away from management. And Craig, every summer in the Rogue Valley, we sit here choking in smoke from fires. Because we don't do enough active management to reduce the fire. We're always going to have fire. I mean, we need to admit that. There's no question about that. The question is, can we do something to reduce the destructive nature of these fires, the catastrophic level of these fires?
The 3,000 degrees that sterilizes the soil.
Exactly. And so if you can reduce the fuel loads that are unnaturally there, we could have a healthier environment. Creating a wilderness area just means get off the land, don't come back, and we're going to walk away and you can stand back and watch the bonfire. I mean, that's literally what's going to happen because it happens all too often. And then the fires roar out of places like that. They'll get into the park. They'll get into private land. They'll do us. And meanwhile, those who like to recreate up there in other ways, snowmobilers, others, are going to be boxed out of yet another chunk of Oregon's public lands. And so I think it's misguided. I think, you know, at some point Oregon Wild's going to have to be known as Oregon Wildfire because they're ones creating all these. And then you don't do any active management. When you don't do active management, then you risk more intense, more destructive, more deadly wildfires. And that's what they're giving us, taking away our access to public lands, our lands, and then leaving fire in return.
Are you going to be able to have a conversation with Senator Wyden about this issue?
You know, I'll leave it up to him what his viewpoint is on it.
I mean,
that's his decision.
I understand that, but I mean, it's just a matter of you're disagreeing, so he's agreeing, so that's ultimately what's
I don't know if
he
supports this or not. I'll let him speak to that.
I
know where I am on it.
Yeah, well, and they're asking Senator Wyden to come out on it. He said he stood up for Crater Lake. He opposed the plan to fly noisy helicopters over the park. And this is coming from Oregon Wild. What's interesting to me is this map was written and put together in 2013.
It takes an act of Congress for this to happen.
Exactly.
I know where I am on it.
Congressman, I want to compliment you on your incredible speech on the House floor. I watched it. I was taken back by it, all 24 minutes of it. I spoke with Joseph Rice earlier this morning from the Oath Keepers, Josephine County. He said it's probably on a landmark speech for you, and I agree. I think it's frustration, and it's a great thing to what you did.
Well, I tell you, it was not what I intended when I started.
I know.
I was going to give a 3 to 5 minute speech, but I felt I needed to give voice to people in Eastern Oregon who I've worked with and represented for many years now, and whose frustration I share deeply and passionately, and I don't always show that. And I realize the importance of showing that from time to time. But when I finished 24 minutes later, I walked off the House floor and I felt like I'd been at a family funeral.
No.
I was that drained. But it all just welled up. The fights I've had with some bureaucrats over there, the fights defending our way of life, our values in Eastern and Southern Central Oregon, against a government that all too often you feel like the fix is in before the process starts. Your voice is not heard because they've already decided. And you can, I pointed to examples, real life examples that nobody's rebutted, by the way.
No.
Craig, the facts are the facts. And I stuck to the facts. What happened on Steens Mountain, where a bureaucrat said she knew the law better than I did, and I wrote the law. And Peter DeFazio even agreed with me on the law. And we went back and got the archives and the records from when we wrote the law, and they still said, no, I don't think so. And their lawyer said, no, we don't read it that way. And so then we passed legislation that said, no, this is the law, this is what we intended. And they said, well, we'll review it. They weren't following the law. There are too many times in this job where you can say, I know what the intent of the law is because I wrote the law.
Exactly. Well, it's a perfect storm. And now I think what's happening, and Joseph Rice mentioned he'd called the governor because he thinks the governor should stand up on this Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. I mean, you said it's illegal. Okay, it's being viewed across the country as an armed takeover.
Right.
And now, when you look at the First Amendment and the right to assemble and peaceably address the redress of grievances, what happens when the government ignores the people? What's the next lawful solution?
We do have ways to deal with changing the law and changing policy, and certainly this whole incident has caused the public in general. Clear to the New York Times just wrote a big story yesterday about the economic situation in Harney County. That never would have happened but for this protest.
No.
But you can't go in and have unauthorized use of motor vehicles. One of these guys took one of the refuge vehicles, drove it to Safeway to get groceries. I mean, you can't do that. I can't do that. He was arrested. So they got to follow the law. There's a way to do protest that's legal and lawful. Now here's the other piece. There was a community meeting in Burns last night.
Right.
And people asked the
fired up.
And they said, it's time for you to go. The people of Burns are saying, and Harney County are saying, you need to go.
They want to get their kids back in school. It's a safety
and the schools
issue.
have reopened, but there's just all this tension and anger out there right now, and they will say a lot of folks there will quietly say we actually are glad they went and did this because finally we're getting some attention here. It's lonely in this delegation. It's lonely representing rural areas of the West to try and get the attention of the bureaucracy, the attention of other policymakers to the problems we face, whether it's sage grouse or kicking cows off the range, which is the goal of some of these organizations. And remember, on top of all this, you got the President of the United States allegedly.
I couldn't believe you brought that up. I couldn't believe it.
He wants, we hear that they want to do a 2.5 million acre national monument in the neighboring county over in the Owyhees in Malheur County. 2.5 million, that's bigger than Yosemite National Park. And the ranchers, I had a meeting out there with the ranchers and the county officials and the sheriff and others, and they're beside themselves.
And the government is not listening.
And they're being told, you better cut a deal with the Oregon Natural Desert Association, environmental group for wilderness, or you're going to get this monument shoved down your throat. It's that kind of intimidation tactics that cause people to just lose faith with their government and be so upset about it. And so I gave the president a letter the night of the State of the Union. I was on the escort committee. I said, Mr. President, I only had about 2 seconds with it. I said,
you just handed to him.
You could help us not put gas on this fire if you'd back away from this, what we're hearing would be a national monument. He kind of looked at me and I said, I got a letter here. I'll leave it with your staff. But, you could do something right here.
Yeah.
For a change. You could do something.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know if he will. I'm going to pressure him, though.
Well, good. Congressman, we have a break coming up, and then we'll come right back. Ladies and gentlemen, first time ever, Congressman Greg Walden. We've had him on the phone multiple times. He's had time to get into our studio. Love that. But first time ever, we're going to preempt the Alex Jones Show and hold Congressman Walden over for just a few minutes.
Hope Alex doesn't get mad.
Exactly right. So coming right back. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. 8 minutes after the hour, the Sunrise Show is preempting Alex Jones. First time ever. Of course, when you've got Congressman Greg Walden in the studio, it's a great pleasure and an honor, Congressman, to have you in. And we just didn't get to finish. There's so much going on.
There are a few things.
We talking about, I've been saying this for since the 5th when Malheur County and Ammon Bundy and his crew, I don't want to see Americans shooting Americans. We have to find a peaceful solution. And from what I'm hearing, the federal government's not coming to the table. And silence is a decision. And, we talked about this last segment is, does the Constitution apply? What are the lawful solutions? And this forces the hand of government and you, per se, as an oath keeper, as you defend your oath to preserve, protect, and
defend the Constitution.
Absolutely. Right. And I'm how do you navigate these waters?
Well, if you have a pretty strong compass and sense of principle, it's not that hard. And I believe these are public lands, and to the most extent possible, they should be available for multiple use and public access. They're public lands. Now, that doesn't mean you or I have the right to do anything we want, anytime we want out there, or claim that chunk of land as our own, because it's not. And, we wouldn't like it if somebody on the left went out and said, I'm going to grab 500 acres for myself and you can't come on and I'm going to do whatever I want to do. That doesn't work either. But I think where people get really frustrated, and I get really frustrated, is when the public has a public process.
Right.
Again, the tribal management plan out in the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest, prime example. Years of public input from 3 counties, county elected officials, citizens in Wallowa and Union and Baker counties, hours and hours working with the agencies to perfect the maps because they didn't even have the roads correctly identified or were missing. And I mean, they did all this work. And then they got a new forest supervisor that came in who picked her own plan that ignored all of that public involvement. 900 people stormed the meeting that was held at the Armory in La Grande one night, furious because they felt like all the work they had done, all the places they've gone for generations to hunt and fish, camp, do whatever, were being locked out. They were being locked out from their public lands by one bureaucrat who decided she knew better. Now, in the end, the Forest Service realized what a mistake she had made and removed her and pulled back the whole plan. But in the meantime, it broke faith with the people who had followed the process the government said you need to follow. And you feel like that fixes in from the beginning then.
Right.
That they're going to do whatever they want anyway,
right,
regardless of what you say or do, so why participate? This is where it breaks down. This is where, and if you go back to when Theodore Roosevelt created the Great Forest Reserves, one of his principles was for them to survive successfully, they had to be in partnership with the local communities. You couldn't just cram something
by
down
law
people's
now.
throat.
You have to be in partnership with
well, you're supposed to be. And so then how do you define that? And what's the community? And so what happens in rural Oregon is because they are federal public lands, so that's everybody in the country, not just people in the local community. But what happens is the people in the local community get nearly completely overridden, and people in Portland get to decide because there are more of them. And this is the feeling we have in eastern, central, and southern Oregon all too often is our voice gets run over by people in about 3 counties in Oregon on virtually every issue. They don't understand what we go through. You know, if Multnomah County, Portland, was 73% federal land and they were reintroducing
they'd
wolves.
Be jumping
Think
up.
of this, Craig. If we were doing wolf reintroduction in the West Hills of Portland, I wonder if we'd have a different debate about the impact of wolves and predation on domestic animals
they'd
like
be livid.
Poodles.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, but it's okay if that all happens out there, out in the east side. That's all right. That's different. Meanwhile, you know, Portland, when they get a rain event, still dumps sewage, raw sewage into the Willamette River. They got a cleanup site. They got all this. What if a wild scenic designation was being pushed on Portland from the Columbia River, mouth of the Willamette, back about 50 miles? I wonder if they would like that. What if we declared the West Hills, the park there, as a wilderness area? I wonder what they would think about that. But see, they think it's okay to do all that out here.
And ultimately, Congressman, you know what happens? The turd is in your pocket.
Well, I'm not going to use that term, but yes.
But I agree. But I mean, truly, you know, if they had the turd in their pocket, they'd be jumping up and down. So the turd is in your pocket. So through leadership now, and how do we get the government to come to the table? If we're going to have a redress of grievances, we're all sitting at the table, and the side with the government and the elected officials, it's empty.
Some elected officials.
Correct.
Some.
I'm speaking. Yeah. You know what I'm speaking about.
Yeah. And so that is the frustration. And so, fortunately, we have some ability to push back on some of these things because we're in the majority in the House. But you still have a White House that's against what we want to do in the West, or at least the rural West, conservative rural West. And so they push back and they get a vote, right? They get to veto or not, the president does. And the agencies he commands just run off too often over the top of people. And
the budget.
Yeah.
The TPP, is that good for America?
I don't know yet. This is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. It's, I don't know, 10,000 pages. I have not read it yet. I have not been fully briefed on it yet. They negotiated
They hid some of it?
A lot of it still actually is still classified, which is fascinating for a trade agreement. I don't understand that. You have to go down to a special room and sign in, and it's all classified, and you can't take the document and say, well, what, on a trade agreement? So I haven't had time to go look at that. I don't think we're going to have a vote on this anytime in the near future, and I don't think the support's in the Congress to pass it right now. There are winners and losers. You begin to hear as different groups evaluate it from their own perspective. You know, I want us in the world of trade to put America first, that any agreement needs to open markets for us and tear down barriers to our producers. And in some categories, it sounds like that's the case, and in other categories you hear now we didn't get a very good deal, and so we got to sort out.
And the
what
currency
is it.
manipulation.
Yeah, currency manipulation issues, and then you hear in autos and pharmaceuticals the way that got negotiated doesn't work for American industry, so they're spun up. Some in the ag community say no, actually this is pretty good, because there have been all this historical set of barriers for ag commodities overseas, high tariffs and limited quantities and all that. So some of those groups are looking at it carefully and saying, well, actually, we may be able to open markets and sell our ag products, which we obviously in our district raise a lot of beef and wheat and other commodities. But you have to, you got to look at this in the whole context, and I just haven't had a chance to.
No, I know. You're swamped. I know it is. Congressman, and speaking of swamped, you've got a full schedule today. You're going to be in Grants Pass and then back to Medford, and I appreciate your efforts, and thank you so much for coming by this morning, and it's great to have you. And anytime, the call in, whatever works, and I get press releases from Andrew, so it's great there, and it's what making America do what Americans do, and not to steal Donald Trump's, but make America great again.
How about just making sure we maintain our freedom and our liberty?
Oh, my goodness.
And allow entrepreneurs in America to be innovative without having to go to the government first all the time. Our great success as a country has been people were free to take an idea and go turn it into something big or lose.
American ingenuity.
And some of the greatest people who succeeded also were some of the lost the greatest too. They tried things, they didn't work. And then they tried something else, and it's been incredible. And I watched the Steve Jobs movie the other day on the plane coming across, and it's interesting because he had failures.
Oh, Abraham! Look at the failures that Abraham Lincoln had before he became president. So, Congressman, thank you again. So I appreciate it. And ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Greg Walden from the District 2 of the great state of Oregon stopped by on his way. He'll be Grants Pass visiting with the Rotary up there, and then back in Medford to speak about the Crater Lake Wilderness at his office on Central Avenue this afternoon at 3:45. We'll return you to the Alex Jones Show after regular